Now on Daf Tes Amud Beis, Ha Gamrina Rosh Chodesh Midi Yom Kippurim, the Lo Parchinam. I wanted to raise a pircha that Yom Kippurim cannot teach you anything because it's Kaparasa Maruba. But wait a second, we just finished establishing here on Daf Tes Amud Aleph that Rosh Chodesh has the power of Kapar for Tumas Migdash Kadosh is derived from Yom Kippurim. So you see that we don't accept that pircha that Kaparasa Maruba. So Gemara answers no. That's not valid. Why? Hasam kapara michtav ksiva gilui milsa bialmahu. With regard to Rosh Chodesh, the Torah explicitly says that it has the power of kapara. We only need to know exactly what are the boundaries of that kapara power of Seir Rosh Chodesh, and for that, all I need is a gili milsa, and that we get from Yom Kippur. Now, again, if we were studying Talmudic thought and methodology, we'd have to spend a lot of time on this concept called gili milsa b'almahu. But whatever it is, it means that it's not the basis for the essential derivation, but rather a Gili Milsa comes to play when I don't know exactly what, how to touch it up, so to speak. Like for example, in Nezikin, we have something called Negifa. So we don't know what Negifa is. So we bring a Gili Milsa to prove and establish what Negifa is. Or we could probably talk about Midos, right? We don't know what the Midah is. You don't know how much water a mikveh has to have, for example, right? So that's called Gili Milsa. We need a Gili Milsa to tell me. Here also, I need a Gili Milsa to define exactly the kapar power of the Sar of Rosh Chodesh. But we know from the Torah itself that the Sar is Machaper. I don't know if he quotes the pasuk for that. Oh yeah, he tells you to look in Bamidbar Perek Chof Ches. Okay. Parshas Pinchas, the parsha of Musaf. But that's not comparable to the case of Regolim. Why? In other words, the Torah never says explicitly that the Seirim of the Musafim of the Shalosh Regolim are Mechaper. We're going to have to derive that totally from Yom Kippur. The very essential power of kapara is derived from Yom Kippur. Then we should say of Pircha, Mal Yom Kippurim Shekain Meruba Kaparasa. We have to go back to that drasha. Sa'ir Usair, the extra vav of Usair, is Hachanami Sar Usair. So the extra vav is for a hekesh. And that extra vav appears, if I'm not mistaken, I have to open up a chumash in the parsha of Musafim of Pesach. And it allows us to equate the Musafim of Regolim back to Rosh Chodesh. Beiskish Sirei Regol v'Sirei Rosh Chodesh is Masei Rosh Chodesh Eina Machap Melal She'ein Bo Yedil Lo B'Tchil Lo B'Sov is Av Sirei Regolim Eina Machap Melal She'ein Bo Yedil Lo B'Tchil Lo B'Sov. So that's what we have in Rosh Chodesh, and that's what we're going to derive through the Hekesh to the Regolim. And the kapar power of Tumas Migdash v'Kadosh of both the Seirim of Rosh Chodesh and by derivation the Seirim of the Regolim is limited to the case of Lo Hayalo Yediyah, Lo B'Tchila, V'Lo B'Sov. Iboilahu. Let's analyze Rabbi Yehuda. Ki Omer Rabbi Yehuda al she'ein bo Yediyah, Lo B'Tchila, V'Sov. Maybe we should limit that statement that the power of kapara of Rosh Chodesh and Regolim is limited to Ein Lo Yediyah B'Sov, only Adimili B'Chet She'ein Sofa Livada. We need the kapara of Seir Rosh Chodesh Seir Regal because he may not ever find out about it. Now, how could it possibly be that he never finds out about it? The answer is that he was there alone. Nobody was there. Not even one person to testify. Now, in such a case, he'll never find out about it. He'll never be able to achieve a kapara. Therefore, the Torah gave the Rosh Chodesh Seirim and the Regalim as a kapara. Aval, but in the case of Chet Shesofa Livada, Kamishi Yesh Yedia Basof Dami. Now, again, if he has a Yedia Basof, that's not going to help us to activate the Rosh Chodesh or the Regalim Seirim, but it will help if he has a Yediyah Basof to activate the kapar power of the Sorah Chitzoni. Because we said that the Sorah Chitzoni is Mechaper if Ein Lo Yediyah Batchila, Aval Yesh Lo Yediyah Basof. V'Sorah Nasa B'chutz, V'Yom Kippur Mechaper. Right, either or. Probably either the Sorah itself will be Mechaper on Ein Lo Yediyah Batchila, Aval Yesh Lo Yediyah Basof, or Yom Kippur itself. And that's one side in the Gemara's suffix here in vacillating about the interpretation of Rabbi Yehuda. So now we're saying that Rabbi Yehuda's statement should be limited to the case of Chet She'ein Sofo Livad. Oh, Dilma, perhaps we could say Afilu Chet She'sofo Livada, even if, let's say, somebody was there at the time that he contracted Tumah, and he will notify the person that he became Tameh, and apparently in Isurim could rely on one aid. So now it's a case of Sofa Livada. He'll eventually find out about it because there was somebody present to witness the case at the time that he contracted Tumah. Is Hashta Mia Chet She'ein Makir Bo El Hashem Karina Bo. So shall we say that if the kapar power of these seirim is limited to a chet of lo haya lo yediyah lo l'tchil lo b'sof because only Hashem knows, what about a case where there's another human being who knows and will notify him, but in the meantime he doesn't know it? So right now we can classify his chet as only Hashem is makir in his chet. And therefore, the chet will come under the kapar power of these seirim. Tashma, this sign will enter the Bryce Hal she'ein bo yedilo b'tchilo b'sof. The chet she'sofo livada. In other words, there was a witness at the time. Is seirei regalim v'seirei shechodesh mechaprim div Rabbi Yehuda. So it means, like the second side in the Gemara, that even though the chet is sofeli vada, nevertheless we consider it as if it was a chet she'eino makir bo el Hashem, because right now he doesn't know about it. Okay, now we move on to Rabbi Shimon. So this sugi of Rabbi Shimon is going to go on and on and on. We'll just sort of begin it. And the two girsos in our Mishnah, two transmissions of what Rabbi Shimon held. According to the first transmission is Rabbi Shimon Omer Seirei Regalim Mechaprim Avalo Seirei Roshei Chadashim. So what's happening now is that according to this transmission of Rabbi Shimon, there's a total disconnect between the kapara of Rosh Chodesh and the kapara of the Regalim. Kapara Rosh Chodesh is limited to tar shachal satamin. In contrast, the kapara of the Regalim is tumas migdash v'kadosh. On Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Oshia, my time in Rabbi Shimon. What was the reasoning of that led Rabbi Shimon to the conclusion that the Sar of Rosh Chodesh is mechaper not on Tumas Migdash for Kadasha, but on Tar Shachal Satomim. Amar Krav Yosot Nasan Lachem laseis es avon ha'edo. Okay, so this is, in its context, is a very complicated masumat between Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron HaKohen after the death of Nadav Avihu, and it's actually a little bit relevant to Lag BaOmer. Ooh, I'm allowed to say Lag BaOmer. Yeah. Okay. Omar Krov Atonos San Lachem Laseisis Avon Ha'ed. So he says the following. The pasuk mentions the seir lechatos, and Moshe Rabbeinu was upset because they burnt the seir and they didn't eat it, and therefore he came to the two surviving sons of Aaron, Elazar and Itamar, and he said, "Why didn't you eat it? Hashem is going to give a kapara for the sins of Klal Yisrael through your eating of the meat of the korban. So why didn't you eat the meat of the chatas?" That was Moshe's argument. Okay, then Aaron came up with the kal v'chomer and so forth and so on. V'yahai kra b'sard Rosh Chodesh ksiv. Now, how do we know that pasuk is referring to Rosh Chodesh? It's Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the 8th day of the Yimei HaMiluim, in which they inaugurated the Mishkan. And it was Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Now, number one, the Nasi of Shevet Yehuda, that's Nachshon ben Aminadav, he brought his chatos. Then there was the chatos of Rosh Chodesh. And then there was a separate chatos as part of the miluim, meaning to dedicate the Mishkan. This pasuk of V'yata nasen lochem laseis savon eda is referring to the chatos of the Soyer Rosh Chodesh and the Musafim. V'yolef avon mitzitz. Oh, now we introduce tzitz. Right, tzitz is mechaper on Tumas Migdash v'Kadashov, and we're going to derive a Gzeir Shava between the Soyer of Rosh Chodesh and the tzitz. Never kan avon. With regard to Rosh Chodesh, it says laseis es avon ha'edo. V'never lahalon avon, and in the parsha of tzitz, which is one of the 8 bigdei kuna that was worn by the Kohen Gadol, is it says v'nosa Aaron es avon hakadoshim. Again, the word avon. And therefore, we're going to derive from this Gzeir Shava avon malahal and tumas basar. Right, not that he was tamei. I'm sorry. Right, not that he was tamei and he was metame the kodshim, but rather the opposite. He was tar and the kodshim were tamei. And that's what the tzitz could be effective for. Is afkan here too in Rosh Chodesh. Tumas basar, we're talking about the fact that he was a tar, but the kodshim were tmeim, and he ate it. So now the Gemara is going to raise the following problem: I malahalan olim afkan olim. Right. What tzitz we said is mechaper on tumas basar, but that's only if they brought the basar on the mizbeach. That's called olin. So should we therefore derive the conclusion from within the context of the Gzeira Shava of Avon Avon that also in the case of the Soyer Rosh Chodesh, the kapara is only for that which is on top of the Mizbeach. So now the Gemara in this Hamamina now, based on the equation to tzitz, is changing the whole nature of the soyer of Rosh Chodesh. It's no longer a kapara for an avon, but rather it's a machshir for the karban. That even though the basar is tamei, now since it's on the mizbeach, it will suffice, and the karban is kosher. Well, but he points out here in the name of Tosas that this is only relevant to those karbanos that are brought on Rosh Chodesh simultaneously. Simultaneously with the soil. So the Gemara says, Avon ha'eda ksiv. Okay, what do we derive from Avon ha'eda? You wanted to say that it's all a din in being machshir the karban once it's on the mizbech, even though it's the basar's tummy. No. This is for an avon ha'eda. The Torah says explicitly it's for the avon ha'eda. And avon ha'eda means not machshir of the karban, but rather to be mechaper for an aver of the yachid in which he was machal kedusha, the kedusha. So your question about la'olim, that you want to change the whole nature of the sa'ir and its power to be mechaper on Rosh Chodesh, that's not relevant. That's thrown out because it says avon ha'eda. It doesn't say machshir, it says avon. Now what is the Gemara asking? Michti. Sure, I know you have to go soon. Michti migmar gamri gmiri hadadi. Right? We're equating somehow the soyer of Rosh Chodesh with the power that sits. Nechap the Rosh Chodesh adidei v'adid sits. Maybe we should give two functions to the soyer Rosh Chodesh. In addition to being mechaper, it could also be machshir the carbon like that sits. Nafkamina lehecha the nishbar sits. Let's say the sits broke, so it can't be mechaper. So therefore, to be machshir the basa that's tummy on the mizbech. So now we'll use the soyer Rosh Chodesh. Omakra avon in singular. Avon echadu nose. V'ena nose beis avonos. Right. So the fact that he put the basar tome on the mizbeach, that's there's no power in the soyer Rosh Chodesh to effectuate any sort of hechshar korban. But the chaper sits adi dev ad Rosh Chodesh. But maybe let's go the other way around. Let's say that the equation now is going to allow an expansion of the power that sits, and it sits is not only machshir, the carbon that's the basa that's tummy al gabi mizbeach, but also could be mechaper like the soyer of Rosh Chodesh. Nafkamina l'tuma de'ira bein zel zeh, and let's say that he violated the Isur Tumas Migdash b'Kadosh of between one Rosh Chodesh and the other, and the tzitz is now going to step up to the plate and be mechaper because it's not time for Rosh Chodesh. Omakra osa. With regard to Rosh Chodesh, the Torah says it's an exclusive power of the soyer Rosh Chodesh. Atanose avon. Vein acheres nose yosef. Nothing else could be mechaper on that avera. Therefore, the tzitz cannot be mechaper. Rav Ashi Omar, he has an alternative understanding of how we derive this conclusion that each one, the tzitz and the carbon, of the Sar HaChitzoni, I'm sorry, the carbon of the Sar Rosh Chodesh have two different functions, two different mechaprim. Ksiv Hacha, with regard to Rosh Chodesh, says Havon Ha'eda. Eda v'lo kodshim. Right, that's the Avera of the Eda, of the people, the members of the community, but not the kodshim that became tummy and was placed inadvertently on the Mizbeach. V'hasam Ksiv, regarding the tzitz, it says Avodah Kadoshim. So that's the case where there was Basa Kodesh that was put on the Mizbeach. Frek the Gemara, and with this we'll conclude. Ashkechan Seire Roshei Chadoshim de Mechapre Al Tor Shachos Hatomei. Fine. We've already concluded that the power of Rosh Chodesh, the Seir of Rosh Chodesh, is to Mechap for a Tor Shachos Hatomei. Seir Regal Mechapre Al She'ein Ba Yedil of Tchilu L'Sofinon. But you haven't told me what's the source for the kapar power of Regolim with regard to Tumas Migdash v'Kadoshim in a case where he didn't have a Yediyah neither b'Tchilu neither b'Sof. Yidom Rab Chama Bar Rab Chanina. What does it say? The Sar V'Soir, the extra vav is Hachanami Soir V'Soir, and we derive the conclusion that the V'Soir means that we give an extra kapara power to the seirim of the regalim to be mechaper on averas migdash v'kadosh. So he says here, in the name of Rabbi Chama, that the Torah could have said Sa'ir. Why does it say Vis Sa'ir, the extra Vav? And we derive Rab Shimon's halacha from the fact that the Torah, instead of simply saying Sa'ir, says Vis Sa'ir. And what does the Vav accomplish here on the top of Daf Yud? Ve'iskush Se'iri Regolim L'Se'ir Rosh Chodesh. Ma Se'iri Rosh Chodesh B'milsa the Kodesh Mechapre. So you're talking about the case of a Tahar that ate Basar Tameh is Af Se'ir Regolim B'milsa the Kodesh Mechapre. So too, in the case of the Se'irim of the Regolim, they could be Mechaper on Tameh, on Tahar Sha'achal Asat Tameh. L'chitema nechapru ad Rosh Chodesh. So maybe we should derive from that conclusion that basically the regalim is just a repeat of Rosh Chodesh, but it doesn't have its own power of kapara beyond the sin of Tarsha Achal Satami. Amrinan ata nosi avon v'ein acher nosi avon. L'chitema nechapru ad Yom HaKippurim, and the Gemara says Amrinan achas b'shana kapara zulo tehei ela achas b'shana amay mechapre, etc. Okay, then, so this is where we'll stop for today on Daf Yud Amud Aleph, which will be tomorrow's discussion.